So there are a lot of things about parenting that frustrate me that I didn't understand would be just a regular part of my life before I had kids. And I'm talking about those things that make your eye twitch a little bit, the things that like you feel the tension rising in you as they're happening. It's those things that make you step back and you look around and you're like, what is happening in my house right now? Parents, you know what I'm talking about, right? You can, even if your kids are next to you, you can nod a little bit. Some of the more self-righteous parents are like, no, Michael, I never feel frustrated with my children. Sure, fine, whatever, okay? You're a better parent than I am. But for me, it's when they're crying because they're going to die of hunger, but the only thing that can satisfy them is ice cream, right? Not an orange, not an apple, not the dinner that they didn't choose to eat 10 minutes ago. Or again, for us, it's like how no matter what time we start bedtime, they never go to bed on time. I'm convinced that we could start bedtime at 6 p.m. and I'd be leaving my girl's room at 8:30. Like, I don't know how brushing teeth and putting pajamas on and reading a book turns into like a full-length Avatar movie where you walk out and you're like, what day is it? Like, I don't know how long I've been here. But the thing that breaks me mentally and emotionally the most as a parent is when they have to look for something that they cannot find. Last week, I was getting my girls ready for bed, and Harper was in a panic because she couldn't find her stuffed giraffe that we've named Gerald. And so I asked her if she had Gerald earlier in the day, and she did. So I just told her, hey, go downstairs. He's probably on the couch. But 10 minutes later, she's back upstairs. She's weeping. She cannot find him. And so, of course, I run through my dad questions, like, did you retrace your steps? Where did you last see him? Did you check under the couch? But she was adamant that she had just looked everywhere. And so I went downstairs with her, and guess where I found Gerald? Right in the middle of the couch. Like, he's just chilling. And he's a well-loved giraffe, so his neck's a little crooked. He's just like looking at me, and I'm like, I see you. He's not under a blanket. He's not missing. Like someone didn't come into our house and steal him, which was a thought that came to Harper's mind. Right? He's right where Harper was sitting before she went upstairs to get ready for bed. And so I said, Harper, he is right there on the couch, and I pointed at him. And then she looked at the couch, and she goes, where? I'm like, Harper, he's right there on the couch. I'm pointing to exactly where Gerald's sitting, and she starts looking around the room. Like, I don't see him over there. So I'm like, I'm getting pranked. I'm getting pranked right now. Like, my wife is filming this. She's going to put it on social media later. But instead of picking up the giraffe and just getting us to bed, we're both very stubborn. She's a lot like me. I just dug my heels in. I was like, Harper, he's right there. Where, Dad? I don't see him. I'm like, look where my finger is pointing. I don't see him. Like, get your giraffe and get up to bed. Here's the best part, though. We went back and forth for probably 2 hours. It was a very long time. But when our standoff finally ended, she walks over the couch, she goes, oh, I found him. And she picks him up and she runs upstairs because she was gaslighting me the entire time. Right now, we're in a series called This Is What We Do, where we are breaking down the mission statement of Collective, right? The what we do as a church. And so we, Collective, right, we exist to help people, that means to help you as well, experience God, find community, and do something that matters. Last week, we talked about what it looks like to experience God. Today, we're going to break down what I mean when I say that we exist to help you find community. And next week, as a church, we are preaching the sermon together through our actions and our generosity during Fort Frederick Week and the grocery store buyout. Now, for those of you who are new to Collective, we've been talking a lot about the grocery store buyout lately, and you're probably still wondering, like, what is this thing? And so we have a video. Go ahead and check that out. I don't know, this like amps me up. I'm like so ready to go. And so if you're wondering, okay, how would we describe grocery store buyout? It's this, okay, grocery store buyout is supermarket sweep, except for instead of just buying hams and cheese wheels, you actually buy things that go to the community. And the organizations are there that day, they pick them up, and it goes out to a ton of organizations in order to bless them and to show them what we are all about. And here's why we do stuff like this. Here's why we're doing this next Sunday. Jesus said in John 13:35, your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. That word love is the same Greek word that Mark used last week when we read about the story of the rich young ruler. Right? It's agape. It's this deep gut level love. It's unconditional love. It's love that is not contingent on the behavior or the actions or even the worthiness of the recipient, because it is a love that is based on the character of the giver. And so Jesus says that it is out of this type of love for people that we will prove to the world that we are his disciples. And I think it's so important to point out that Jesus doesn't say it will prove to the world that you are my believers. Because this isn't about something that we feel on the inside. Jesus is talking about how we live our lives. He's talking about what we do with that love, because a disciple of Jesus is someone who is led by Jesus, being changed by Jesus, and committed to living out the mission of Jesus. And so it is our love through our actions that we will show Frederick what we're all about. And like my other preaching friends like to say, is that'll preach. That's a really good sermon. But before we get to that, I want to talk about what do we mean by Collective helps you find community. And just like last week, we're going to start by looking at Jesus, because we didn't invent this. This isn't a rhythm that we created. It's when you look at Jesus' life that's found in the biographies of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, when you look in the Gospels, you see this rhythm where he prioritized his relationship with God, he prioritized his community, he prioritized serving others. And so let's read the story in Luke 6 again, starting in verse 12. It says, one day, soon afterward, Jesus went up on a mountain to pray, and he prayed to God all night, right? He's experiencing God. Verse 13, at daybreak, he called together all of his disciples, which was a large crowd of followers, and he chose 12 of them to be his apostles. And then he actually goes on to list the names. He says, Simon, whom he named Peter, Andrew, Peter's brother, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, another James, son of Alphaeus, Simon, who is called the Zealot, Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who later betrayed him. And when you read through the story of Jesus, you see that this is his community. These are his 12 closest friends. For the 3 years that he is on earth doing his ministry, they are right by his side. And because Luke, the author, points this out, I want to point this out as well. Even Jesus was betrayed by a friend. Right? We don't need to overlook that. This is important. Right? And this is more of an aside this morning, but this is an important one. Because we can't expect our community to be perfect and for it to never include some of the painful parts of a relationship, because even Jesus wasn't exempt from that. And so for those of you who already, when you hear the word community, that walls up, right? You're already saying to yourself, I don't want to find community because people always let me down, or I don't want to find community because what if it doesn't work out? Tell that to Jesus. Because he understands this. In fact, he even knew ahead of time that Judas was going to betray him, but didn't stop him from finding his 12. And so you see them doing life together. And if you keep reading in the book of Luke, in Luke 8, we start to see these dynamics shift a little bit. Where he has his 12, but he also has this tighter circle of guys that we like to call his crew at Collective. In Luke 8, Jesus is asked by a man named Jairus to come to his house because his daughter is sick. And this is what Jesus does in Luke 8, verse 51. It says, when they arrived at the house, Jesus wouldn't let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, as well as the little girl's father and mother. And so Jesus, the 12 are with him. He actually tells the 9 to stay outside and says, hey, I only want these 3 guys because these are the guys that I'm closest to. And as you keep reading through the story of Jesus' life, you find that this is a pattern. There are multiple times where he picks just Peter, James, and John to be with him in these really big moments. Moments like raising Jairus' daughter from the dead, which is what happens next in that story. There's another moment, it's called the Transfiguration, where Jesus goes on top of the mountain, he brings these 3 guys with him, and God reveals his glory to them. And then at the end of his life, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and again, he brings all 12 of the guys with him, but it's only Peter, James, and John where he shares in this incredible moment of anguish and sorrow before he goes to the cross. And so Jesus had a community that he spent time with, he ate meals with, did life with. These are guys that encouraged him, and he encouraged, they supported each other, they were there for each other. But he also had this tight inner circle that he was more real and more vulnerable with. And so like we said last week, Jesus needed community. And if the Savior of the world, if Jesus needed community, so do we. We were designed to have real, honest, life-giving friendships with other people, which means you need people that you can lean on while also being the type of person that people can lean on. You need people that you can be real with while also being the type of person that others can be real with. You need people that will push you to stronger faith and a better marriage and a healthier life. You need people who will hold you accountable when you're acting out of integrity. You need people who will sit with you as you go through the most painful things you will ever go through. You need community. We need community. This summer, I was reading through the book of Acts for a series that we're going to start in September. And while I was reading, I read this story that I've heard a ton of times, but it just hit differently because I was also thinking about what we were doing right before grocery store buyout. It's about a guy named Saul. In the beginning of the book of Acts, Saul is persecuting and killing Christians. But then one day, Saul is heading on his way to Damascus to literally knock on doors and arrest and persecute more Christians. But Jesus appears to him and speaks to him. And of course, this happens. And so Paul repents of the way he's living. He gives his life to Christ. And then Saul, who later changes his name to Paul, he goes on to plant churches and he completely changed the world. But there's this pocket of time between his conversion and church planting when his life has completely changed. And so what does he do? He walks into the church in Jerusalem looking for a community to be a part of. But this is what happens in Acts 9, starting in verse 26. It says, when Saul arrived in Jerusalem, he tried to meet with the believers, but they were all afraid of him. They did not believe he had truly become a believer. Now put yourself in Saul's shoes for a second. Like, how vulnerable must it have felt for him to attempt to find community with the believers in Jerusalem when just a few weeks earlier he was trying to destroy them? Like what did this feel like? They knew his story, they knew his past, they had heard the rumors. But he had changed, and he knew that there was a church to be a part of, like a community to invest in. And my guess is that many of you know a little bit about what this feels like, because you know what it feels like to be rejected. You know the fear and anxiety that comes to trying to make friends. You know the insecurity that comes when you feel like everyone knows your story and knows your baggage and knows your mess. You know how vulnerable it is to step into a new community asking, will anybody actually care about me? And it's these feelings that have stopped you from joining a small group. It's your past experiences that had you avoid any of the summer social events that we did. It's situations like this that have you sprinting out of church every Sunday as soon as it's over. And I see that. We see that. We know that you know what it feels like to be Saul. But let's keep reading. Verse 27. Then Barnabas brought him to the apostles and told them how Saul had seen the Lord on his way to Damascus and how the Lord had spoken to Saul. He also told him that Saul had preached boldly in the name of Jesus in Damascus, meaning the place he was going to persecute Christians. He ends up sharing the gospel with them. But in this story, we find out there's a guy named Barnabas, and Barnabas is a leader in the church. And he sees Saul, and he steps in and says, Saul has a place in this community. He goes to the leader of that church and says, this is a place where Saul can belong. And because of that, Saul finds community in the church that you know he never imagined he would have. He finds a community that doesn't care about what he's done. He finds a community that doesn't care about his past because all they care about is his future. Verse 28, it says, so Saul stayed with the apostles and went all around Jerusalem with them, preaching boldly in the name of the Lord. He debated with some Greek-speaking Jews, but they tried to murder him. When the believers heard about this, they took him down to Caesarea and sent him away to Tarsus, his hometown. And there's so much we could learn from this story. Like how Saul, we read that he was preaching the gospel, so he was becoming a strong follower of Jesus. He still craved a community to be a part of with other people who are running after Jesus. We could talk about how after being a part of this community for a little bit of time, as he starts to go through trouble, they rally around him, right? They protect him. Right? We could talk about how Saul was searching for community and Barnabas created community, and both of those things had to happen for this to exist. But here's what I want us to hold on to from this story this morning. It doesn't matter if you have faith that is solid. It doesn't matter if you've been following Jesus for a little while, like you figured it out and you're still running after him. It doesn't matter if you aren't sure if you believe. It doesn't matter if you don't believe at all, but you are here. You need community. And the best place to find that is in the church. So here's what I want you to write down. The best place to find the community you were designed to be in is in the church. It's not at work. It's not through hobbies. It's not in your neighborhood. And that's not to say you can't find community in those places, because you can. But we're talking about the best place. Recently, The Atlantic put out an article titled "The True Cost of the Church Going Bust: How Many Americans Seem to Have Found No Alternative Method to Building a Sense of Community." And this article was written by a guy named Derek Thompson, who is actually agnostic. And I want to read to you how he started this article. He wrote, "As an agnostic, I've spent most of my life thinking about the decline of faith in America in mostly positive terms. Organized religion seemed to me beset by scandal and entangled in noxious politics, so I thought, what is there really to mourn? Only in the past few years have I come around to a different view." He actually goes on to write that over the past 25 years, approximately 40 million Americans have stopped attending church, which is the largest concentrated change in church attendance in American history. But then he says this. He said, "This decline is one of the major contributing factors to loneliness in America." This is a guy who doesn't go to church, who's saying that the drop in church attendance is hurting us because people don't know where to find community anymore. He says it's not a coincidence that as more people walk away from faith, the sense of community and belonging in our culture are at all-time lows. Because even he recognizes that these two things are connected. Throughout the article, he shares a bunch of data that backs this up. He shares that 15 to 19-year-olds who are fleeing religion faster than any other American subgroup, he says they have seen the largest decline in socializing, and now 15 to 19-year-olds socialize less than 3 hours per week. He shares that people who do not attend church regularly, and by regularly he's not talking about once a month, he's talking about 30 plus times a year, that these people are less likely to volunteer, they are more likely to feel lonely, and they themselves report a lower satisfaction in their social lives and in their communities. He writes that Gen Z is the loneliest generation the world has ever seen, but the generation coming after that will be even lonelier. He writes that half of adults would say that they feel alone on a regular basis, and 15% of people would say they do not have close friends that they can count on. And so here's how I'd sum all this up. The decline in church is hurting people because it has led to the decline in community. Now, of course, Derek Thompson is sharing something that we already know, and that's that the best place to find the community we were designed to be in is in the church. You know, from time to time, I'll get an email or I'll just have a conversation with somebody, and they'll tell me that they are struggling to find community here. And they'll say things like, hey, I don't really know anyone, I can't make friends or haven't made friends, or I'm not sure there's a place for me here. And when Collective first started and I heard stuff like this, I would be crushed because I would never want people to feel this way. But 8 years into this thing, I have realized that finding community is a choice because the opportunities have always been there. And it's that these people have chosen not to find it. If you want to find people to hang out with, to grow in your faith with, to be real with, to do life with, to support and be supported by, that is wholly and completely up to you. And I think a lot of those people have been looking for community the way that my kids look for things when they've lost them. Because it's right in front of them, and we point every single week. We're saying it is right there, and they are choosing not to see it. And so if that's how you feel, this is me pointing and saying, this is where you find community. It is joining a small group. It is attending one of the hangouts. It's joining a serving team, because that's where it is. Because the reality is, you cannot just show up on a Sunday morning and expect to find community here. You can't. Right? You can find glimpses of it. You can kind of get some of the warm and fuzzies of community after service when we do fun things or when we worship together. But the community you were designed to be a part of, community that is real and vulnerable and messy and fun and supportive and challenging and life-giving, only happens when you step into it. And so last week, I made a promise to you, and you made a promise to me. I promised you that I would do everything I can as your pastor to help create the best space possible for you to experience God. And your promise back to me was that you would do the hard work to eliminate those barriers and those walls that you've put up so that you can fully experience Him. And so we're going to do that again. Let's make promises to one another. I promise you that I will do everything I can as your pastor to create as many opportunities as I can for you to find community here. Right? I will be Barnabas. My staff and my leaders will be Barnabas. But you have to promise me that you will step into those spaces that we have created so that you can actually find community. And if you don't, and if you choose not to, that is totally your choice. Right? We can't force you to do anything. But if you choose not to step into those spaces, you have to promise me that you understand that that is on you. And you cannot walk away from this church one day saying you couldn't find people here when we're pointing right at it, saying it's right there, and you're looking around going, where? I don't see it. I can't find it. It is in small groups. It is serving on a team. It's going to our hangouts. Not every once in a while, not one time, not signing up but never showing up. It is following Jesus' lead of building a rhythm in your life where you are in community, because that is the thing that we've been pointing at since day one. And yes, meeting people can be scary. Yes, going from acquaintances to community will be messy. It is guaranteed. And yes, there are going to be times when you step into those spaces and it doesn't connect right away, and that's okay. You find a new group to be a part of. You don't have to love everybody that you bump into all the time. But when you find community the way God designed community, it will be life-changing. A few weeks ago, we celebrated at third service our 249th, 250th, and 251st baptism in the history of Collective all at the same service. It was incredible. And whenever someone gets baptized here, we always try to share part of the story. But one of the things we didn't mention about Rachel, Jeannie, and Casey is that all of them go to the same small group together. And this small group is led by Peggy and Joel, who became friends because they started serving on a team together. You can clap for Peggy and Joel. We love them. And so when they approached us a little bit ago about starting a small group, we were like, hey, this feels weird. Because when you look at Joel and Peggy, you're like, they have nothing in common. There are two things. They love Jesus, and they both served at Collective together. And they realized, hey, we should start a small group. And so they check all the boxes and the expectations we have for our leaders, and so we said, let's do it. And if you go to that group or if you see them out in the community, you'll look at them and say, I don't understand how they're all friends. Because it is a group of people who are in completely different stages of life. Some are married, some are single, some are divorced, some are still in school, in their career, retired. But they hang out all the time. They serve together. They support one another. And it all started because they showed up at a random small group during the week. But it gets even cooler than that. In the baptism picture, in the middle was Jeannie. On the right-hand side was Casey. And Casey recently got accepted to medical school in Idaho. And when her mom, Jeannie, started to plan the trip to drop off her daughter at college, some of the people in her small group said, hey, you don't need to drive across the country all alone. We'll come with you. And they actually drove across country together to drop Casey off at school. And they got along the entire time. And so Jeannie and her daughter Casey and friends that they had made in small group, people they did not know 2 years ago, they made a cross-country trip together. And that really hard, really sad thing of dropping off your daughter at college on the other side of the country wasn't as hard or wasn't as sad because they didn't have to go through it alone. And here's the deal. When we started small groups at Collective, which we actually started before we ever had Sunday morning services, when we started small groups at Collective, our prayer was that people would hopefully find people to connect with and be real with and hang out with. But it has become so much more than that. We have seen men who are doing the very hard work of dealing with that shadow that's deep in their soul realize that they don't actually have to do that work alone because they have other men holding them up and standing next to them. We've seen women who have struggled to trust other women find community and realize that their past betrayal, their past relationships, don't have to dictate their future friendships. We've seen young families realize that they don't have to go through this incredibly difficult season of their life alone because they found community where they can share the good, the bad, and the ugly of raising toddlers. Mostly ugly, but they're together. We've seen young adults, the loneliest generation in America, say, I don't want to feel this way anymore. and vulnerably step into a small group with other young adults. We've seen people show up when people in their community are struggling. We've seen teams rally around each other in prayer. We've seen groups share in the joy of a birth of a child after being with them through the pain of a miscarriage. We have seen people celebrate promotions and marriages and steps of faith together. We've seen people come so close together that they now consider each other family. So just let me say this as bluntly as I can. If you just show up on Sunday mornings, it will almost be impossible for you to find the type of community that we have talked about today. The cross-country type of community does not exist if you're just showing up and bailing once it's over. In fact, if you've been around Collective for even a little while, you hear me say this from stage all the time. If you are just showing up on Sunday morning, you are part of a crowd. That's not a me thing, that's not a church thing. That's just a psychology thing. It's a science thing. There are too many people in here for this to be a community, because it only exists when you step into those spaces. So here's what we're pointing at, right? We're pointing at small groups. And so when we come back from grocery store buyout, sign-ups open up, you join a group. We're pointing at serving a team alongside other people. You can do that right now if you want to. We're talking about hangouts. The next time we do this, it's showing up. Because if you don't actually step into one of those spaces that have been created for you to find community, you will never experience the community that you long for and were designed for. You will always look at pictures of a road trip and go, man, I wish I had that, as you sprint out of church on a Sunday morning, because you have to step into those spaces. Now, before I pray to close us out, and before we head out this week to do something that matters, I want to remind everyone why For Frederick Week is so huge. Because I think there's a misunderstanding that Christians in the church simply serve because that's what we're told to do. But it is so much bigger than that. The reason we serve our community is to create opportunities so that people one day show up at Collective so that they themselves can experience God, find community, and do something that matters. And so this week, we are going to serve over 1,000 hours. We're going to purchase over 20,000 pounds of food and over 7,500 hygiene items. And while this will meet the needs of our community, the real reason we are doing this is so that we can show the love and the grace and the hope of Jesus to the people of Frederick and beyond. Because that is what it's all about. It is so people like Deirdre can have their lives changed forever. Check this out.
My name is Deirdre Ruskowski. I'm the residential manager at Andrea's House. Andrea's House is a faith-based organization, and we serve women who are struggling with substance abuse and trauma, and they can have their children with them or reunify with their children in our program. My early years were very dysfunctional and very chaotic. Starting around 11 or 12, that just led up to years of this until I was 46 and had just had enough. That led me to seek treatment, which did not work out for me, and I was asked to leave. And Carlia, who at the time was my sponsor, told me I could then come into her program, and I thought, I don't think so. I just decided I was gonna go home. I made it about 2 hours at my house before I texted Carlia and asked her, when could I come? We got to experience For Frederick Week at Andrea's House. It was like, there are no words for that. Collective came in, they were only supposed to paint. And what they did beyond that was not only paint our kitchen and the cabinets, they painted the entire downstairs. They also carried up dressers from the garage. They did yard work. They helped organize the garage. Like, it was like a whole new house once they left. And then the grocery store buyout, we're still using laundry detergent from last year's grocery store buyout. I think we got enough diapers to fill up a year's worth of diapers. I don't think any woman in that house will have to buy diapers or wipes. It's unbelievable. Like, that is church showing up the way Jesus shows up. My first experience at Collective was, I was a little hesitant at first. Carlia had been dropping some subtle hints about coming, and when I finally was like, let me just try this out to make her happy, I walked in here and I thought, wow, these people are okay. I kept coming back, and I just kept coming back, and I just kept liking it more and more. My decision to get baptized was not an easy one, and I struggled with it, honestly. I can't remember who the pastor was that day because it wasn't Michael, but his whole sermon was on baptism, and it was like he was speaking directly to me. I filled out the connection card, and that's how it happened. And then I decided to fill out the next step for serving. I thought, what reason do I have not to serve at Collective? People help me do it, so I need to be the one that jumps out there and is helping the next person do it. We need to prioritize being a part of this week, because you may be the only Jesus somebody gets to meet this week. Maybe they'll come here and get to know God the way I got to know God.
Can we give it up for Deirdre? So last year, for the first time ever, the grocery store buyout actually had a lower attendance than what we average on a Sunday morning. And it wasn't even that afternoon before this just started to mess with me. And for the next few weeks, I began to wrestle with, what does it mean? Like, is this not good? Are we feeling like, what is going on? And so I started calling some other pastors, some of my mentors, and talking to them about it. And one of my mentors said to me, it's probably because it might not be some people's thing. And so for a few months, I started to believe that that was true. That not everyone enjoys serving or being generous or grocery shopping to help people in need. And so because of that, we actually began to talk internally as a staff about whether or not we would do grocery store buyout again. Because if it's not actually helping us reach lost people, if it's not actually helping us create space and opportunities for people to experience God, then we need to stop doing it. Right? Because if it's not doing the things that Jesus is asking us to do, then it's not something we should give our time to. But then I was reminded of Deirdre's story. And I stopped believing the lie that it might not be some people's thing, because here's the deal. It is our thing. It's Collective's thing. This is what we do. Right? We exist to help people experience God and find community and do something that matters. And like Deirdre said, this might be the only Jesus that our community gets this week. And we actually understand, we've been doing this long enough to understand that this might be the only Jesus that some people get all year long. And so if this is not somebody's thing, then this might not be the best church for somebody. And so listen, I know that for those of you who grew up in a traditional church, the grocery store buyout doesn't feel like church. You feel that tension? It is church, okay? Jesus isn't mad at you for doing this thing. And I know that some of you are already viewing this as a Sunday off, where you get to sleep in, you get to take the day. But what we do next week matters. Not just because people need help, not just because there's a ton of food insecurity in our city, not just because our students need support, not just because people in recovery need to know that they are loved. It's because people need Jesus. They need grace and endless second chances. They need his truth and a better way to live. They need community, and they need what matters the most. They need a Savior. They need heaven. And we get to bring it to them. Let's pray. God, we are just so thankful that you gave us the gift of the church. God, as messy as it is, as hurtful as it has been for many people in this room, God, you still gave us this gift and said, this is the place where you can live out the life that I've called you to live out. This is the place where you can worship me. This is the place where you can find community. This is the place where you can actually do something that matters. God, we are wholly undeserving of living out your mission. God, we don't understand why you choose us and let us go out into this community and teach people about you so they can come back and give their life to you, but you do. And God, we recognize that we get to be a part of something big because you let us. But God, help us not lose sight of that. Understanding, without us stepping out of this space and what's safe for us here, Deirdre doesn't know you the way she knows you. God, that there are people in our community who woke up this morning feeling like something major was missing from their life, and we know what it is, and next week we get to bring it to them. They get to see it. And God, our prayer is that for people who get to experience you for the first time, or at least in a different way for the first time, they come to this church called Collective. And while here, they realize that they are experiencing God in a way they never imagined, God, that they are finding community that they never thought they deserved, and that in the end, they get to go help and seek and save lost people in the same way that people did that for them. God, we are just so thankful that we get to be a part of that. God, we pray next week that it's not just an hour painting, it's an opportunity for someone to hear how good you are and have their life changed forever. God, we pray for more stories just like Deirdre's. We love you and pray these things in your name. Amen.